This video is going to offer a quick overview of the digestive system. Now, a lot of my videos are playing in the background, and if you would have questions beyond this quick overview, obviously I have a lot more information. But this overview was meant, instead of say for allied health majors as some of my other classes, rather, just those who were looking for the background to understand, how the digestive system works in general, and perhaps in the future to make informed decisions if it came to any, disorders of, the digestive system, which would affect them or family members, etc. So first of all, the digestive system has two parts, what's called the gastrointestinal tract. This is the tube through which food literally passes. This would include the mouth, the pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine. So food passes through these structures. But then there are a number of additional structures included with the digestive system called accessory structures. Food does not directly pass through salivary glands or the pancreas or the liver or gallbladder, but nevertheless, their secretions help with the process of digestion. So our digestive system is composed both of the tube through which food passes and then these accessory structures whose secretions help in the process of digestion. Now, moving forward, there are microscopic layers of the GI tract, which these structures would share, whether we're talking about the stomach, the small intestine, etc. Come on, sorry. And so that's of interest. As we, kind of skip the microscopic aspect, however, the organs that we're going to discuss, they do two things. They can participate in what's called mechanical digestion. And in mechanical digestion, the foodstuffs which we ingest are mixed with digestive juices. So for example, let's imagine you eat a French fry. Your mouth, with your teeth, your tongue, your saliva, et cetera, that processes, and the stomach will process it. And largely at the end of this process, you are left with this. So the French fry had starch molecules in it. And now look, the starch molecules are still there. They're just mixed up in the digestive juice. So what leaves the stomach is still starch. It is just now a semi-solid mix known as chyme. However, in the small intestine, if you look at this video, starch would not simply be mixed with digestive juices. Starch would be broken down completely into its individual components, the little molecules or monomers, which make up the larger molecule, or the polymer. This is what's known as chemical digestion. And so as we go through the organs of the digestive tract, it's important to recognize that there are these two different components. So some organs, such as the mouth, the stomach, are going to perform more mechanical digestion than chemical digestion, while others, like the small intestine, would be the primary site where chemical digestion occurs. Now, just very quickly, obviously this begins with the mouth. And to truly, address the mouth, this will take some time, because the mouth is special. We take it for granted. So for example, if I tell my students, you chew your food, I look around the room for excitement. There is none. But then I say, that's actually very special. Virtually nothing chews its food. Birds don't, reptiles don't, amphibians don't, fish don't. And so chewing food is something that the mammals do, which helps to prepare the foodstuffs to be broken down completely, because mammal bodies are so expensive. Not to speak of this lightly, but you're 100 degrees. You have a huge brain. You walk upright and are very active. And it's very hard to supply enough calories to get the human body through a day, because everything that I just said is so expensive. according to the last UN statistics that I had read, tens of thousands of people die every single day of either hunger or a hunger-related disease. The human body takes a lot of energy to get through the day. And so therefore our digestive systems don't have the liberty of what, say that of a fish or a turtle or whatever have. They need to get an incredible number of calories. They need to get every source of nutrition out of this food, or else humans, we simply can't survive. So in the mouth, we have glands known as salivary glands. Just a quick point, there are different types of glands in the body. The glands of this chapter on the digestive system, these are primarily what are called exocrine glands. They are making products which leave the body traveling through a tube or a duct. And that's different from endocrine glands, which make hormones. Hormones don't leave the body, nor do they travel through tubes or ducts. Now, while hormones can be made by the stomach, the small intestine, most of the glands we talk about, such as salivary glands, are exocrine glands. The pancreas does have some endocrine tissue making insulin and glucagon, but that's only 1% of it. 99% of it is exocrine. So the digestive system is a good example of the exocrine glands making products which are leaving the body. So bile, pancreatic enzymes, saliva, these are leaving the body, going into the middle of that, that gastrointestinal tract. So we care so much about our nutrition that we are actually going to start processing food in our mouth for a bit. Most animals don't. I mean, you think of how a crocodile or a fish, or a frog or even a bird eats. It's chomp, chomp, swallow, right? There's very little processing going on in the mouth, whereas we have, keep food here more time here. And so therefore there's a salivary, there's a parotid gland with its parotid duct, a submandibular gland with submandibular duct, and sublingual glands with their sublingual ducts. And together they're making the saliva. It's primarily water with a little bit of mucus to moisten the food so that this will be able to, pass down the GI tract more easily. But there are also a few other things like enzymes which start to break down the food, buffering agents for acidic foods, even some things which help the immune system, given that a lot of microbes actually do enter the body through the mouth. We have different kinds of teeth. Teeth have a hard enamel layer, that's the hardest substance in your body, a layer of dentin, that's the second hardest part of your body. And if we want, we could split the teeth into the crown, which is above the gum line, the neck at the gum line, and the root, which is beneath the gum line. One of the things that makes our teeth special is that in addition to having different kinds of teeth, we have canines and incisors for tearing our food, and we have molars and premolars for grinding our food. So we have different kinds of teeth. Compare that to, say, a crocodile, where there's just one kind of tooth, the sharp, pointy kind. We also have what's called tooth occlusion, where our teeth form matching surfaces, where when we shut our mouths, they actually touch each other and then allow for food to be crushed between the two surfaces. So here, for example, if you look at the teeth of different organisms, notice that the teeth have matching surfaces. And so therefore, this allows the animals, unlike, say, this salamander, where the teeth are just sharp and pointy, this allows animals to better grind food better grind food. This is what's known as occlusion. And once again, we mammals, we do a lot of processing in our mouths. So this is especially the fact that the teeth not only touch, but they have these matching surfaces. So food stays in our mouths for a while. We have cheeks which hold it there. We have a very muscular tongue which can move it around. We have a hard palate which separates our nasal cavity from our oral cavity. And so thus food gets processed in our mouths to form this soft, mushy bolus, which then moves back to the back of our throats, where we start the swallowing reflex. So there is skeletal muscle, which is voluntary in the mouth and then in the external anal sphincter. But the muscle in between is all smooth muscle, which is involuntary. So once we decide to swallow, that's the last voluntary input we have into this process for a while. And so then the esophagus will then perform this wave of muscle contraction known as peristalsis, where we have two layers of muscle, and together, just in a wave, they push food down towards the stomach. Once again, this is just a quick overview. The stomach is such a big organ, that we can split it into sections and mention, a greater curvature, a lesser curvature. As far as the regions go, there's the cardiac region where the esophagus enters. If you have heartburn, it can be that the sphincter here is allowing stomach acid to irritate this area and the esophagus. There's a fundus, which if we were to have like a really big meal, say on Thanksgiving, food could be pushed there as a temporary storage. There's the body, and then where the food meets, or the stomach meets the small intestine, it narrows to form the pylorus. Now, when I teach in a classroom, I often just step outside the room and I say, look, here's an open space. I can walk from this space out into the hallway. But if I want something special to go on to this room, I can close the door. So the digestive tract is the same way. Here, there's a continuous space between the lumen of the esophagus, the lumen of the stomach, the lumen of the small intestine. But we can close it off. That way, one area can be special. The stomach could be acidic, for example. The small intestine can be basic. And so we have these muscular thickenings known as sphincters, which can open and close. So the esophageal sphincter here opens when we swallow food. If it doesn't, food might get caught there, and that's uncomfortable. Some people think they're having a heart attack when they're not. It's that food has lodged here. Also, we don't want it to stay open when it shouldn't, because that could be a cause of acid reflux, which is not only uncomfortable, but as it causes more cell division in the esophagus, could actually contribute to esophageal cancer. The stomach is primarily a mixing bag. While some chemical digestion does occur here, the main purpose is for the soft, mushy bolus of food to be converted into a semi-solid juice known as chyme, which then can pass the pyloric sphincter into the small intestine. The amount of time that food spends in the stomach varies. If you eat a carbohydrate-rich meal, that will tend to pass rather quickly because the stomach doesn't do much for the digestion of carbohydrates. But then in contrast, if you eat a protein-rich meal, it will stay longer. The stomach is lined by what are known as gastric pits, these cells secrete a number of things, such as enzymes which can break down food, a protective mucus which coats the lining of the stomach to protect it from acid, and then acid. The acid of the stomach is valuable for many reasons. It kills microbes because we ingest incredible numbers of them. Most of them die in the stomach. It starts to change the shape of proteins to make them easier to digest. And then also the enzymes which work in the stomach require acid in order to work. Enzymes, they depend on very specific shapes, and the surrounding environment can change their shapes. And so in the stomach, pepsinogen is converted into pepsin, but that only happens in acid. So the enzyme which breaks down protein in the stomach relies on acid. The small intestine, however, is basic. All right, it neutralizes the stomach acid, and so thus all of the enzymes in the small intestine, they require a basic environment instead of an acidic environment. The pancreas empties into the first region of the small intestine, the duodenum, just after the pylorus of the stomach and the pyloric sphincter empty into the duodenum, also often pronounced duodenum. And so the pancreas is an exocrine structure. You can notice this prominent duct, the pancreatic duct, and a smaller accessory duct. And so while it does make hormones like insulin and glucagon, most of the pancreatic tissue is making enzymes which will help break up food in the small intestine. So as such, it is an accessory structure. Not only does the pancreas empty into the small intestine here, but so too does the liver. The liver is the second largest organ of the body after the skin, and it is incredibly important. You know, perhaps as a quick mention, when you digest your food, the blood with all of the components that you digested, this blood then goes into veins. And you'd think that these veins with the nutrients from your last meal could go into the inferior vena cava and to your heart. It doesn't, however. All of these veins fuse to form a hepatic portal vein, which goes to the liver before it goes anywhere else. So when you eat a meal, your liver gets it first. All right. So we have this vein which goes to the liver. So all of the nutrients that you ingest go to the liver before you get before any other part of the body gets it. And why is this? Well, because the liver has so many functions. So there are almost 200 different functions associated with the liver. The liver does all of these things with carbohydrates. The liver does a lot of things with lipids, with proteins. The liver detoxifies things, so whether it be alcohol or hormones from plants or animals or poisons, many of the plants which we ingest have actually toxic molecules because plants don't want us eating them, and they put toxins in there to discourage animal predation. The liver breaks these down. So the liver actually has hundreds of functions, and that was just an example of that. And so the liver is interesting because not only is it getting oxygenated blood through a hepatic artery, but then there's this blood coming from the GI tract, coming from the hepatic portal vein. One of the things that the liver does is it makes bile, which will help us digest fats. And so this bile produced in the liver then goes through what are called bile ducts and empty into the small intestine. So here is kind of a representation of the section of the liver. While the blood is flowing towards the center, bile is going now more towards the outside of the liver lobules and drain into ducts. So bile can go from the liver through hepatic ducts into the common bile duct into the small intestine. But if you're not currently eating a fat-rich meal, this little sphincter can close and then the bile can back up into the cystic duct and gallbladder. And the gallbladder can then store and concentrate bile. And then the next time you eat a lipid-rich meal, say a bowl of ice cream, not only then could you'd be getting bile through the hepatic ducts into the common bile duct into the small intestine, but now also this concentrated bile from the gallbladder. Since the gallbladder concentrates bile, there is the potential that it could concentrate it so much that it makes it a solid, forming gallstones. And gallstones, if they can't be broken up otherwise, might require the removal of the gallbladder. And this might mean that in the future, someone should cut back on their intake of lipids because they don't have the ability to concentrate bile. So a lot of things empty into the small intestine. The stomach, as part of the GI tract, empties into the small intestine, but right where it does, the pancreatic duct and the accessory duct from the pancreas empty into the small intestine. The common bile duct, bringing bile from the liver and gallbladder, empty into the small intestine. And so the small intestine can be split into 3 regions. Externally, they all look the same, and so there's no way of distinguishing between them from the outside. But under the microscope, one can see that they are different. The shortest region, the first one, the duodenum, this has a number of glands because it's secreting enzymes which will digest food, but also it then has to neutralize stomach acid. And so under the microscope, this first section has glandular tissue, which the other regions lack. The middle section of the small intestine is called the jejunum, and then the final section is known as the ileum. The ileum not only has a major role in digestion, but one of the ways to identify the ileum is there are large patches of immune cells which help to control microbial populations. And so the stomach has a lot of acid, and so here the first part of the small intestine has a lot of glandular tissue, not only secreting enzymes, but then also then neutralizing the stomach acid. The small intestine, is the primary place for chemical digestion. So if you were to pick the most important part of the digestive system, it would be the small intestine. And your small intestine has to touch your food because a lot of the enzymes which break down your food are literally attached to the cells of the small intestine. So unless you're physically touching your food, you're not breaking it down, nor are you absorbing it, because a lot of the pumps which absorb the nutrients in your diet, they are physically attached to the cells. So your small intestine wants to touch your food as much as it can. And to do so, there are 3 things which increase the surface area of the small intestine. One, there are these circular folds. So instead of just being a perfect circle, here there are these ridges. The small intestine goes up and down, and these circular folds then increase the surface area. Secondly, there are these finger-like extensions known as villi, composed of many cells. Right? So look at all of the extra cells which will touch your food, because the small intestinal lining goes up and down and up and down and up and down. So there are lots of villi here. And then if you were to look at the individual cells of the villi under the microscope, you would see that they have a fuzzy border. That's because each individual cell has what are called microvilli. And thus, as a result, you have this great surface area to digest your food and absorb the good stuff because of the circular folds, the villi, and then the microvilli, these small ridges on individual cells. These greatly increase your surface area, so then it's now thousands of times more than it would be if it weren't for these things which increase surface area. I apologize for the delay, zooming and videos. They each slows the other one down. And here, just as what I had said under the microscope, you can distinguish between the first part of the small intestine, the duodenum, which has these glands, Brunner's glands, which others lack. The last part, which has patches of immune cells, known as Peyer's patches, and then the jejunum, which has neither of those. And so under the microscope, we have differences between the first part of the small intestine, the second, and the third, but these are not visible from the outside. Most of your digestion occurs in your small intestine. So by the time you reach the large intestine, food is being prepared to leave the body. Now, as we'll see, there are bacteria here which do perform some additional digestion, but for the most part, digestive processes are over by this point. So the small intestine will enter. There is a sphincter, the ileocecal sphincter, which separates the ileum, the final part of the small intestine, to the cecum of the large intestine, and then food can then pass along the large intestine. The cecum is kind of this blind pouch which stores microbial populations, so that, for example, these help our digestion, and in case you were to say have diarrhea and lose all of the microbes of your large intestine, the cecum would serve as an additional pocket of them. And to that, attached to it, we have some additional immune tissue known as the appendix, which I'll get to in the next video. Now, we have a lot of bacteria associated with our body. We call it the microbiome. We're just beginning to appreciate how important it is. Actually, there are more cells of the microbiome than there are human cells associated with your body. So when you look at the mirror and what you see in front of you, there's actually more bacterial cells there than human cells. And they help to break down some of the components of our diet, and we absorb stuff from it. And so this microbiome is important to health, and the large intestine is the largest constituent of it. These cells here, which are staining blue, these are cells which are making mucus, which then helps the material in the large intestine pass, because as we absorb more water from it to prevent water loss, this mucus coming from these cells called goblet cells, they then help with the passage of the material. And so once again, the veriform appendix attaches to the cecum. One always has to be careful of pain in the lower right abdominal quadrant, because that's where the appendix is located. And if the appendix were to become blocked, it could become inflamed and then even burst. And then that might, release all of these microbes into the pelvic body cavity, which could cause, an infection so great that it would be potentially life threatening. So the appendix is, a potential health concern, and it's, is a little disturbing that any of us could wake up and be having a wonderful, normal day, but if we start to have, pain in the lower right abdominal quadrant, that by the end of the day, we might need to be rushed to the hospital, and if we waited any longer, that there would, potentially be a bursting of the appendix, which would be potentially life-threatening. That was a quick review of the anatomy of the digestive system. Now, I have lots and lots of videos which go through other aspects of the digestive system physiology, primarily the process of breaking foodstuffs down, but also hormone release and other things. Let me just kind of quickly give a synopsis of that, because it does involve a little chemistry. And once again, I have videos if that's what you're interested in, but I'll make this quick if not. So when you first look at the food that you've eaten, you might first think that you've made a mistake, because there are two problems. One, the molecules are just too darn big. They're too big to travel. They can't, pass cells. They can't go into the blood. They can't leave the blood. And so big carbohydrates, big proteins, big lipids, etc. Why did you eat them? They're just too big. Second problem is they came from another organism. All right, so this isn't human triglyceride, it's olive oil or fish oil. It's not human glycogen, it's potato starch. It's not a human protein, it's protein from spinach or bananas or chickens or pigs. So what did you do? These molecules are too big, they came from another species. Why did you eat them? In the cases of fats, the lymph is also possible. It's small enough to travel, and these little molecules you need, but you can reassemble molecules. So this human the building blocks of this then came from the amino acids of other organisms that I ate. So even though I didn't eat anything which had keratin that I could say transport directly into hair, I broke down the proteins of what I ate into amino acids, and then I reassembled the amino acids to make my human proteins. So that's the overview of digestion. Any further discussion, and I'll quickly mention a little bit of this, then goes into, well, how do we break these big molecules into little molecules? And then the answer is with enzymes. So chemical reactions tend not to just happen on their own, certainly not at a level that we like. And so therefore, we have to kind of make them happen. So our body makes these proteins called enzymes, which make chemical reactions happen. But an enzyme then has to have a molecule fit directly in it so that it can change it. And so therefore, there's kind of a precise matching between the enzymes and the molecules that it reacts with. So for example, when we ingest starch, which could be half the American diet, we need to break that into small pieces. So there's an enzyme called amylase, which is made in salivary glands. It's made in the pancreas. Amylase breaks starch into smaller sugars known as dextrins. Now, before I follow the dextrins, just to point out, there's a lock and key mechanism. So amylase precisely fits starch. But when we put amylase in the acid of the stomach, that changes its shape, and thus it no longer works. So enzymes need to have a specific shape, and that's why the pH of different regions of the digestive tract are so important, because that can then alter the shape of these enzymes. So amylase starts to break down starch into dextrins. The small intestine then has other enzymes like the pancreatic amylase that the pancreas made and released into the small intestine, which continues to break starch into dextrins. And then the small intestine can make enzymes like dextrinase, which then break starch, or then break dextrins into glucose. So you ingested these big molecules of starch, too big, and it came from another species. But thanks to these enzymes, you end up breaking the starch into dextrins, the dextrins into glucose. And so now you can then digest this. There are other carbohydrates in our diets. So there are smaller carbohydrates, which we call disaccharides. This would include things like maltose, sucrose, which is table sugar, and lactose, which is milk sugar. And the small intestine makes enzymes that break these disaccharides into pieces. So there is maltase, which breaks up the disaccharide maltose. There is sucrase, the enzyme, which breaks up the disaccharide sucrose. And then there is lactase, the enzyme, which breaks up lactose. So as a result of the small intestine, all of these other carbohydrates then get broken down, and we can reabsorb them into our diet and use them for energy, etc. One problem with lactase is that we all make lactase as infants because we are mammals. Mammals obviously are defined, by their mammary glands, which provides milk, that first source of nutrition for infant mammals. But most mammals don't have milk in their diet after infancy, so most mammals stop making the enzyme lactase. If you don't make the enzyme lactase in your small intestine, then lactose reaches the large intestine. And when it reaches the large intestine, the bacteria there, they can break it down. The problem is most people don't like when that happens. So if bacteria are breaking down lactose in your large intestine, it will produce gas and have other consequences that most people feel would make them prefer to not have dairy in their diet. And so most people are lactose intolerant as adults, which is the normal condition for being a mammal. Most mammals don't make lactase after infancy. And so if you stop making lactase at a point in your life, and this can happen at any point of your life, you can say, oh, I always enjoy ice cream and cheese and dairy products. But there could then come a time in your life where you stop making lactase, and now you are lactose intolerant. This could cause then discomfort to the point where you might choose to avoid dairy products from that point on. One final point is cellulose, what we often refer to as fiber, is a polysaccharide. It is a sugar, but we lack the enzymes to break it down. All right, so cows and goats and termites can break down cellulose, but we can't. And so then it passes through the digestive tract unchanged. Now, fiber is good in the diet, and there are a number of positive effects, but it doesn't serve a nutritional value. We don't break it down, we don't absorb it. It simply passes through our digestive tracts. Okay, so that was a quick description of how we digest carbohydrates. And then we could talk about the other groups as well. Once again, I have videos on this. I'm just going to make this very quick. We break down proteins into what are called amino acids. So a protein is a chain of amino acids, and we possess enzymes which can start at the end of a chain and break off the pieces there. Those are called exopeptidases, and they act in the small intestine. But their efficiency is increased by what are called endopeptidases, which break the proteins in the middle of the chain, so that now instead of these really long proteins, we have shorter ones. And so pepsin in the stomach, or trypsin and chymotrypsin in the small intestine, they are breaking up protein chains in the middle. We also break up fats. And so there are enzymes called lipases, and that is their job. And we make lipases a bunch of places where there's a lingual lipase in the mouth, there's a gastric lipase in the stomach, the small intestine makes lipases, etc. Okay, so we have lots of different lipases. And what lipases do is they take fats and oils, which are what are called triglycerides, and then break them into their individual glycerol and fatty acids. And that way, when we want to make human triglycerides, we can choose not the fatty acids, which say the olive chose to make olive oil with, or that the fish chose to make fish oil with. We can choose our fatty acids to add to glycerol and make our human triglycerides. Now, lipases are certainly useful. They are the enzymes which break up triglycerides into fatty acids and glycerol. But we also then make use of bile salts from the liver and gallbladder. That helps if we have a big droplet of fat or oil. It breaks it into little droplets of fat and oil so that the lipases can work more efficiently. So there's a lot of chemistry involved, but then that is the nutshell of the process of digestion. We eat big molecules and we can't use big molecules. They are too big to transport, and they came from another species. So we need to then break them into the um, smaller molecules, which can be not only absorbed, but then reassembled to make, sorry, wrong one, reassembled to make our human molecules. And so this is what the enzymes of the digestive tract do. Mechanical digestion helps to mix our foodstuffs with juices so that enzymes can access this. But then whether it be enzymes in saliva or pepsin from the stomach, or the enzymes in the pancreas, which function in the small intestine, or the small intestine's own enzymes, etc., all of these then break the big molecules of our diet into the smaller molecules. The last point is then after your digestive system processes all of this food and absorbs it, the question then becomes, what does one do with this? And that then is the topic of metabolism, which would be a separate set of considerations and involves a lot of chemistry. One quick point is that when you eat a meal, for example, there's carbohydrates very often, especially if you add a lot of starch. But now this puts your body in a difficult spot because you don't want to have too little carbohydrate in your blood, because now your brain doesn't have any energy. That's bad. But too much carbohydrate in your blood is bad because that causes glycation. That's actually bad. It promotes heart disease, diabetes. It's actually one of the reasons for aging, why we gradually deteriorate over time. And so then here's this, balance that we want to find. We don't want our blood glucose to be too high nor too low. And so your body then goes back and forth between two states over the course of a day. What's called your absorptive state and your post-absorptive state. When you're in the absorptive state, this would be, what happens for a couple hours after each meal. When you're in the absorptive state, your body's glucose needs are being met by what you're absorbing from your small intestine. So your brain needs glucose and you're absorbing it from your small intestine. That's where the glucose comes from. So you're in your absorptive state. Now, in your absorptive state, you make a hormone to tell your body that you're in the absorptive state. That hormone is insulin, made by the pancreas. So the pancreas's insulin is the sign that you've just had a meal, telling your cells, hey, there's glucose in the blood, take it up. Which helps, if your blood glucose is too high, that then helps then to bring it down. Then the alternate state is what happens in between meals and when you're asleep. You're in your post-absorptive state. And here you see the liver cells taking up that glucose and storing it for later. In the post-absorptive state, when you need glucose, that's when your pancreas makes the hormone glucagon. Glucagon is the signal of the post-absorptive state, essentially saying, hey cells, it's been a while since we've eaten. Hey liver, if you have any of that glucose you stored from previously, that would be good right about now. And so the states of your body with regard to metabolism are regulated by hormones like insulin, the hormone of the absorptive state, telling us we've just eaten and to take glucose out of our blood, lowering blood glucose, and glucagon telling us that we haven't eaten in a while, so it's time to make glucose and thus raise blood glucose levels. So this was just a quick overview of some of the aspects of the human digestive system.